No woman can match me, not now, not blindfolded. He scoffed, laughing as the audience froze and cameras snapped. But when Eliza Moreno stepped onto that stage, calm and silent with a silk blindfold tied across her eyes, she didn't just play, she changed. The sound of history. What began as an insult became a revolution, as one overlooked woman shattered the arrogance of a legend with nothing but heart memory and music that moved the world now. Before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day, and drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. Women don't have the hand strength or mental discipline for real piano mastery. He said loud enough for every journalist in the room to hear his smirk slicing through the air, sharper than any T he'd ever struck. Sebastian Voss leaned back in the velvet-cushioned chair like a man fully convinced of his own invincibility. His voice echoed through the marble-walled press room of the Danforth Conservatory, where gold chandeliers shimmered above like constellations, watching the collapse of humility. The room crowded with industry critics, music journalists, and students from the academy fell into a stunned hush. Some gasped, others chuckled nervously, unsure if it was satire, but Sebastian was deadly serious. Eliza Moreno, seated quietly in the second row, stared down at the program in her lap. The edges, crinkling beneath her fingers, she didn't move. She didn't blink. She had learned long ago that stillness, graceful, deliberate stillness, was often the loudest protest, but inside something cracked like a wine glass too long exposed to heat. A reporter stammered, "Are you saying women can't play at the highest levels?" Sebastian chuckled, the kind of laughter reserved for those who believe the universe exists to orbit them. "I'm saying it's biology. Darling, not misogyny. Look at the greats Horowitz. Gould Argaret is an exception, but even she wouldn't dare duel me blindfolded. It's physics. It's mental mapping. You can't teach instinct." The cameras snapped furiously. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few eyes turned toward Eliza. But she remained still, her dark eyes unreadable, as if storing the moment in some internal vault where future firestorms were forged. Sebastian continued casually tossing a silk handkerchief back into his blazer pocket. "I'd gladly duel any female pianist in the world blindfolded if it makes them feel more equal." The moderator tried to interject, but the damage was done. The sentence had detonated across the room like a grenade wrapped in velvet on the far side. Someone's phone buzzed already. The quote was traveling. Eliza stood. She said nothing. She did not need to. Her exit was not dramatic, not rushed, not designed to reclaim a spotlight, but it was felt. Every step across the marble floor clicked, like the stroke of a metronome, controlled and deliberate behind her. The cameras kept flashing, but no lens could capture the storm rising quietly behind her eyes that night. Social media exploded. The video of Sebastian's statement garnered over 1 million views. Within 6 hours, the music world was ablaze with commentary, some defending him as a provocator, most condemning him as the symbol of everything wrong with gatekeeping in classical music. Eliza Moreno should respond. One user tweeted, "She already did," replied another. She walked away like a queen, but away from the noise. Eliza sat in her modest apartment above a bookstore, hands resting gently on the silent keys of an old, upright piano passed down from her mother. She didn't play. Not yet. Her mind wasn't on revenge nor recognition. It was somewhere else, years ago, in the shadow of a concert hall she was never invited into. Eliza's mother had worked nights as a janitor at the Halberst Academy, one of the most elite music schools in the country. While her mother swept floors and emptied trash bins, Eliza wandered the empty halls, drawn like a moth to the echo of forgotten music. One night she found it a Steinway grand in an abandoned recital room, lit only by moonlight through tall stained glass windows. She approached it like a cathedral, and then she played not well, not at first. But there was something there, an aching, searching quality, like someone speaking a language they had never heard, but somehow already knew, and someone was listening. Professor Aldous Crane, a blind man with snow-white hair and a cane, that clicked like a timekeeper on stone, had been resting in a nearby office when he heard her. He didn't interrupt. Not that night, but he left a note on the bench the next morning. "If you come again, come without fear, come with intention. Music hears what people refuse to." And she had night after night. With his quiet guidance, he never asked her to read music. Instead, he told her to close her eyes and find the silence between the notes he taught her to play. Not with her eyes, but with her memory, her hands, her soul. It was Aldous who blindfolded her for the first time, placing a silk scarf across her eyes and whispering, "Now play it like you lived it, not like you learned it." She had forgotten that moment until now. Now the memory returned not as a whisper but as a calling. The next morning she went for a walk through Madison Park. She needed air, she needed grounding, and that's when it happened. A girl no older than 10, with curly hair and callous fingers that hinted at hours of practice, walked up to her with a cautious glance. "Are you the lady he talked about?" Eliza turned slowly. The girl fidgeted with a folded program from the gala concert. They said, "Girls, can't play like the greats, but my mom said you're the best she's ever heard." Eliza knelt to the girl's level. "What do you think?" The girl didn't answer at first. Then she looked up and said, "I think he's scared of you." Eliza laughed softly, not in amusement, but in recognition the girl wasn't wrong. Not entirely. She stood. Her fingers tingled with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not defiance, not pride, conviction. That night she sent a simple email to the concert hall's director. "I accept the challenge name. The stage 2 pieces Blindfolded by morning." It was all over the news. The event was announced within 24 hours. The duel Voss versus Moreno live, Blindfolded tickets sold out in 8 hours. The conservatory's phone lines crashed, sponsors lined up, everyone wanted a piece of the spectacle, but for Eliza, it was never about spectacle. It was about sound, about truth, about the echo of that first note she struck under moonlight when no one believed in her name. As the date approached, the pressure intensified. Sebastian gave smug interviews, laughing at the overhype, calling it a stunt designed to soothe the Twitter mob. He promised to wear silk cuffs just to show how relaxed he was. Meanwhile, Eliza requested a single thing, a blindfold of her own, not just any fabric, but the same silk scarf Professor Crane once placed over her eyes in her small apartment. She tied it gently and sat before the piano in silence. No audience, no lights, no cameras, only stillness, then one note, then another, then a storm of sound that had waited years to be heard. And this time, she wouldn't play to prove herself. She would play to undo everything he thought he knew. The lights above the Danforth concert hall glowed like a constellation summoned to witness something far greater than music banners draped over. The marble columns read simply, "The Duel," no subtext, no explanation. The world already knew what was coming. Inside the hall was electric. Not the polite murmur of a classical audience waiting to be impressed, but the heavy, hungry silence before a storm. People from every circle had gathered: critics, celebrities, students, veterans of the keys, and those who had never once stepped into a music hall, drawn here by the firestorm that had ignited across the nation. The stage was clean, too identical. Concert grands stood like twin sentinels at opposite ends in the center. A single stool, a blindfold, sat on it like a crown made of silk. Backstage, Eliza adjusted the cuffs of her black dress, simple, sleeveless, tailored to her body, but unadorned. She wore no jewelry, no heels, only flat black shoes, the kind that felt like home to her feet, to the rhythms she knew would soon pour out of them. A knock on the door. It creaked open. "10 minutes, Miss Moreno," came the assistant's voice. She nodded. But her mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was back in that first recital she had ever dared to attend, standing in the back of a great auditorium as a child, too poor for a ticket, watching through the service door as the great Sebastian Voss performed. With mechanical brilliance and a face carved from pride, she remembered the way the audience had stood when he rose, how they had bowed to his perfection, how her mother whispered, "He is like stone, flawless but cold." And now that stone was waiting for her in the opposite dressing room. Sebastian was swirling brandy in a glass he had no intention of drinking. He had already spoken to 3 magazines that week, posing near his piano, commenting on Eliza's raw enthusiasm and how he admired young blood, even if the fingers haven't fully matured yet. Even joked on live television, "I hope she's more than a #pianist," but something noted at the edge of his composure. He remembered the night of the press conference, her stillness, the look in her eyes that did not burn with anger, but with something worse, something patient, something ancient, and tonight that silence would sit beside him on stage. They met under the lights at precisely 700 p.m. The stage manager introduced the format. Each pianist would play one piece of their own choosing and one selected by the other. Both would be performed blindfolded. Judges, 3 world-renowned performers, would evaluate expression technique, emotional, translation, and originality. Sebastian stepped forward. First, he removed his jacket with theatrical flair, rolled up his sleeves, and tied the blindfold with the drama of a matador. The crowd watched amused and curious as he cracked his knuckles and gave a mock bow toward Eliza. "I'll begin with Rachmaninoff," he said to the microphone, his voice, deep, charming, and filled with that poison the world had once called charisma. The first notes dropped like marbles, precise, fast, exact. His fingers glided with confidence over each phrase, cutting through the prelude in G minor with icy control. The audience watched in admiration, but not awe. It was mastery without mystery, perfection without pain. By the time he struck the final chord, the applause was immediate but not overwhelming. It sounded like what it was, respect, not reverence. He rose, removed the blindfold, and turned toward Eliza. "Your turn," he said softly, as though offering a dare, dressed in silk. Eliza said nothing. She stood slowly and approached the bench with reverence, not showmanship. As she sat, she drew from her pocket an old piece of silk, faded, slightly frayed at the corners. The audience could not know its origin. But she did. That scarf had heard more music in the dark than Sebastian had in all his light. She tied it gently over her eyes, and the moment she placed her hands on the keys, the room itself seemed to bend toward her. She began with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, 3rd movement, a piece that begins like quiet desperation and builds into furious defiance, but she did not rush. She touched the first notes, as if waking something sleeping inside the wood. Each measure breathed, each crescendo clawed upward like a woman rising through grief, breaking through, weight refusing to disappear. She was not playing notes. She was telling a secret she had buried for years beneath rejection and ridicule, and every bar of it was real. A tear slid down the cheek of a judge. The final storm of notes erupted in a cascade, and when it ended, there was no applause. Not for a full 3 seconds, because no one could move the silence after her performance was its own kind of ovation. Then came the roar. They stood not politely, but instinctively. People screamed her name. Someone dropped a program. One critic dropped his pen and let it roll beneath the seat. Sebastian did not stand. He watched her remove the blindfold with the same silence she had once walked out of his press room. And for a flicker of a second, he knew she had not come here to win. She had come here to reclaim everything they told her she was never allowed to reach. He clapped once, twice, then stopped backstage. The staff prepared the final round. Eliza would choose the next piece for Sebastian. He waited for a predictable challenge. Perhaps Chopin, maybe Debussy, something elegant but standard. Instead, she leaned into the mic and said, "Listen." There was a visible shift in the room. La Campanella was not just hard, it was hell. a firestorm of leaps, glissandos, and unrelenting speed. It was not designed for calm hands or uncertain minds, and it certainly wasn't the kind of peace you offered. Someone? If you wanted mercy. Sebastian's jaw flexed once he gave a short bow. Very well, he said, but he knew this wasn't a duel anymore. It was a reckoning. As he sat tying the blindfold once more, something inside him trembled. Not panic, but vulnerability. He had never played La Campanella blindfolded, never needed to, never thought he would have to. The music began, and almost instantly he was off. Not fatally, not embarrassingly, but off. Just enough he missed a transition. Then he rushed a repeat, a fingering, slipped. He caught it. But now he was aware, now he was inside his own head. The confidence cracked, a single bead of sweat slid down his temple. He finished, but it was survival, not performance, and in his heart he knew what was coming next. She would play the same piece blindfolded without fear, and she would not aim to match him. She would aim to transcend him. "You looked nervous," the judge said softly as Sebastian stepped off stage, removing the blindfold with more force than grace. Sebastian forced a smile, the kind stretched too tightly across a face that no longer believed in it out of practice with that one. "Not my usual Liszt tempo." The judge didn't respond. Not with words, just a slow nod that said more than silence, and silence tonight was everywhere. Eliza remained in the wings, her hands clasped in front of her like a prayer not yet spoken. She had watched every twitch of his hands, every stutter of breath between the phrases she'd counted, not the mistakes, but the fear inside. Then for once, Sebastian Voss had played like a man trying not to fail, instead of a master daring to fly. And now it was her turn. She walked onto the stage with the quiet gravity of someone attending a memorial, not a match. The crowd settled the way oceans do when the storm has passed and something vast is about to rise from the deep. She paused before the piano bench and untied her scarf with reverence. Then she sat, lifted it again, and bound her eyes once more. But this time it wasn't just a blindfold. It was a veil over the past, over every rejection letter, every backhanded compliment, every time someone said for a woman after praising her skill over the nights she wasn't invited, the festivals where her name was omitted, the judges who called her unrefined, all of it. She exhaled and played. The opening notes of La Campanella spilled from her hands like glass bells dropped into water, crisp, pure, impossibly precise. The audience barely breathed. There was no hesitation, no clumsy recalibration like Sebastian's only clarity. But it wasn't the precision that stopped hearts. It was the phrasing. She didn't just play the piece, she reimagined it. Instead of treating it like a fiery technical sprint, she let the melody float above the chaos, a ballerina pirouetting on the tip of a tornado. The rippling arpeggios weren't just flourishes, they were stories, questions, answers. At one point, a passage known for its blistering speed arrived. But instead of racing through it like a metronome addict, Eliza slowed it down just enough to pull a breath from it, like catching a falling snowflake before it hit the ground. The judges looked at one another, astonished. One whispered, "She's rewriting Liszt mid-performance." She was. And it was working. The crowd leaned in, some with eyes closed, others with hands clasped as though in worship. A child in the front row began to cry, not out of fear or sadness, but the way people cry when they encounter something too beautiful to name. Sebastian watched from the shadows, arms folded but no longer smug. There was something soft in his gaze now, something foreign, something he hadn't felt in years. Oh, Eliza reached the climax of the piece, her fingers dancing so quickly and gracefully that they appeared to vanish beneath the light. And all the while she was blindfolded, seeing only the map she'd built in her soul over decades of being ignored. She struck the final note like a question mark hanging in the sky. Then, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't end with applause. The kind that hovers in the chest and refuses to move. The kind that transforms people. And when the audience finally remembered their voices, they didn't cheer. They erupted. The ovations surged. From the seats, Like a wave crashing through marble, people screamed, stomped, sobbed. The judges rose one by one, their faces stunned, broken open by something they couldn't name but would never forget. Eliza sat motionless at the bench for just a moment. Longer, the blindfold still covering her eyes. Then she slowly reached up, untied it, and blinked into the light, but she didn't smile. She stood bowed deeply, not to the audience, but to the piano, and left the stage. Not once did she look at Sebastian, not because she didn't care, but because she no longer needed to backstage. The press surged toward her, shouting questions. "What message do you have for Mr. Voss? Was this about gender equality? Did you expect to win?" She raised a hand, not to silence them, but to calm the noise. Then she said softly, "Tonight wasn't about beating him. It was about becoming who I've always been. The music never doubted me. I was just waiting for the world to catch up." The next day, the headlines circled the globe. Blindfolded pianist stuns the world. Voss humbled as Moreno redefinances virtuosity. She didn't just play Liszt, she freed it, and perhaps most poignantly from a quiet music blog we thought we came to. Watch a duel. What we witnessed was the crowning of a queen who never needed a crown. Sebastian made no further public comments. He canceled the rest of his tour and retreated from the spotlight, reportedly entering a months-long silence to reevaluate his relationship with music. Eliza, on the other hand, didn't rush into endorsements or tours. She returned to the small bookstore apartment, to the upright piano, to the quiet street where no one had known her name, and now everyone did, but she still practiced blindfolded, not because she had to, because it reminded her that even in the dark, she could create light. The crowd didn't want to leave even after Eliza had walked off stage. The echoes of her final note lingered like mist, clinging to the rafters. People milled about in the marble aisles of the concert hall, wide-eyed clutching programs, as if they had just witnessed something, too sacred to fold away. Some had tears in their eyes. Others spoke in hushed tones, not wanting to disturb what they had just experienced in a hallway behind the stage. Eliza stood with her back against the cool stone wall, breathing deeply. Not from exertion. Her hands, though tired, still tingled with quiet energy. But from something deeper, she had not anticipated the silence after the storm. To feel so loud, a production assistant approached her carefully, like someone nearing a sleeping tiger. "Miss Moreno, the judges would like to speak to you in private." Eliza blinked, then nodded. She followed the assistant down a quiet corridor, every step echoing like punctuation between chapters. They entered a side room lit by soft golden sconces, where the three judges stood, waiting, their expressions grave. But warm, the eldest of them, Maestro Kroll, a titan in the world of European classical music, stepped forward first. His voice was gentle, like a bow drawn softly across a cello. I have taught Liszt, performed him for decades, but tonight, his voice faltered. "Tonight you gave him a voice I never knew he had." Eliza said nothing. Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to praise spoken like confession. The second judge, a stern woman known for her brutal honesty, simply extended her hand. "Not just technique," she said. "Emotion, courage, vulnerability. We weren't judging a competition tonight. We were witnessing the arrival of something we don't have a word for." Yet the third judge, younger, leaned forward. "Where did you learn to phrase like that, to pull time apart like thread?" Eliza hesitated, then answered quietly, "I was taught by someone who couldn't see the keys, so he taught me to hear the space between them." The room fell still, and then one by one the judges bowed, not as performers, not as critics, but as students who had just been humbled. She left the room without fanfare across the hall. Sebastian sat alone in his dressing room, staring at his hands. They looked the same as they always had, long, strong, precise, but for the first time in his life, they felt like someone else's, as if they had betrayed him, or worse, revealed him. He had no excuses left, no technicality to hide behind. She had played his challenge blindfolded and transformed it into something bigger than him he had offered. War she gave rebirth. Sebastian looked at the piano in the corner and, without thinking, reached for the blindfold still folded beside it. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly left the room without putting it on. Outside, the street was flooded. With cameras, reporters clamored for statements. Fans waved at Eliza as she exited, but she paused only briefly to smile at the little girl from the park, the same one who had once said, "I think he's scared of you." Tonight the girl didn't say a word. She just held up a hand-painted sign that read, "She played in the dark and lit up the world." Eliza smiled, placed her hand over her heart, and disappeared into the city the next day. Her name was on every screen, every article, every morning show, but not in the way she feared. They didn't turn her into a spectacle. They turned her into a signal that the mold had cracked, that the gatekeepers had fallen asleep and the music had found its own door. Interviews poured in from every corner of the globe. Record labels called talk shows. Begged invitations arrived from conservatories that once ignored her applications. Even her old academy, the one her mother used to clean at night, sent her a letter. Not a contract, not a job. Offer. An apology. Eliza didn't respond immediately. She took long walks, played piano with the windows open, bought sheet music for composers she'd never heard of. She didn't need to race. The world had finally turned to face her, and she had no interest in chasing it. A week later, she received a message unlike the rest. It was handwritten from Professor Aldous Crane. She hadn't heard from him in over a year. Age had slowed his fingers, and his health had weakened. But the letter was strong, Eliza. You did not just play music that night. You returned music to itself. He reminded it what it was, before it was performance, when it was still prayer. And you reminded me why I ever taught in the first place. If I hear one more note in this life, I'm grateful it was yours. Tears blurred the ink as she folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. A few days later, an announcement stunned the music world. Eliza Moreno had agreed to give a single encore performance, not at Carnegie, not in Berlin, but at the tiny recital hall of the Alberto Academy, the same place she had once snuck into as a child, the same institution that had once looked through her like smoke. But this time she wouldn't be playing as a student, or even a guest. She would be playing as the new artist in residence when she entered the hall for the first time. As a featured artist, the custodial staff stood in the lobby waiting. One of them, an elderly woman with silver-streaked hair and a crooked name badge, approached her slowly. "You're Rosalie Moreno's daughter, aren't you?" Eliza turned, startled. "My mother?" "Yes, you knew her." The woman nodded. "She used to sneak in and sit in the back when you played at night. She told me once, 'My girl plays like she's trying to build a world better than this one.'" Eliza's lips parted, trembling. "I never knew she watched. She never wanted you to know." The woman smiled, said it might make you play safer. Eliza laughed gently through the ache in her chest. She was right that night. The recital hall was filled beyond capacity, not with critics or elite donors, but with students, janitors, cafeteria workers, parents, people who remembered what music could do before it was bought and sold. She walked onto the stage with no fanfare. She sat, she tied the scarf over her eyes once again, and she began to play, not to prove, not to win, but to heal. The moment her fingers touched the keys, something ancient awakened. The recital hall was not vast. No marble columns, no velvet drapery, just plain walls that had once absorbed the indifference of gatekeepers, the silence of the overlooked. But tonight the walls were listening, and more than that, they were remembering. Eliza's blindfold had become a kind of truth serum, without the glare of lights or expectation. Her soul rose freely, stripped of performance, untouched by spectacle. Her playing was gentle at first, a melody that felt like sunrise through a window. No one knew was there. It was her own composition, never written down. It came from somewhere behind memory, soft, sorrowful, defiant. The audience did not clap when it ended. They wept. A girl in the second row wiped her nose on her sleeve, then clutched her mother's hand. A custodian stood frozen near the back door, mop bucket, untouched eyes wide with something, like reverence. Eliza removed the blindfold, slowly blinking into the dim golden lights. Then she spoke not into a microphone, not to command attention, but as if confessing a secret my mother once told me. When you don't have the power to speak, let your fingers say it for you. No applause followed, just a silence so complete it was louder than thunder. And then, without cue, the audience rose to its feet, not to cheer but to honor for Eliza Moreno. That night was not a performance, it was reclamation. A week passed. Then, 2. Eliza declined commercial deals, ignoring multi-million-dollar offers to license her name to a perfume, a fashion label, even a luxury piano brand. She agreed instead to one thing: to teach not full-time, just on Saturdays, to children whose families had never even touched a piano key. "I want to build players," she told the director, not products. Meanwhile, in a quiet stone house tucked away from the city, Sebastian Voss watched the footage of Eliza's encore performance late into the night over, and over not with bitterness, not anymore, but with the pained awe of a man hearing an echo of something he used to feel, and had long forgotten. He had not played since the duel. His fingers remained capable, his ears still sharp, but something inside him had fallen silent. Not broken. No, that would have been easier. What he felt was not collapse, but hollowness. The terrifying realization that he had spent his life chasing mastery and had somehow missed meaning. He stared at the piano across the room, like it was a stranger one afternoon without telling anyone. Sebastian visited the music academy, where Eliza now taught. He arrived unannounced, dressed plainly in a navy coat and worn shoes. No entourage, no cameras, no fanfare. He watched through the glass of the practice room as Eliza guided a small girl with trembling hands through a basic chord progression. She did not correct with harshness. She encouraged with stories. "This chord," she said softly, resting her hand on the girl's shoulder. "This one sounds like a question you're afraid to ask, so play it like that." The girl tried again. The sound was imperfect, but alive. Sebastian stepped back from the window before she could see him. He walked the halls of the academy for a while, letting the sounds of music, real messy, beautiful music, fill the empty places inside him that night. For the first time in months, he sat at his piano, not to rehearse, not to record, to remember.